Hi everybody, welcome to this week's mentality tip. I want to get right to it. I'll probably do this over two different mentality tips, but let's start and jump into it. I've been getting a lot of questions and a lot of stuff lately on violence, and I want to really expand out and talk about what violence is, what makes up violence, and how we can better understand and train for violence. First thing is, violence is not a standalone topic, okay? There's been hundreds of, I'm sure, probably even thousands of books written on violence or shows about violence and stuff like that. Here's the thing. Any book that's worth its weight, or any video, or any show, or anything that's ever worth anything when it comes to violence is never going to talk about violence directly. Here's the first thing you have to understand. Violence is not a subject matter that stands by itself. There is no such thing. Violence cannot exist on its own. Let me be real clear with this. You can never teach someone to elbow and be violent through that elbow, in the sense that the elbow is not violence. Do you get what I mean? A knife is not violence. The fact that a knife can cut, can kill, does not make it violent. A gun cannot be violent. It just can't be. It doesn't exist that way. So the study of violence is never the study of one thing. I think a lot of people, when they're looking for how do I become more violent or get in touch with that violent side, they're looking at it like it's one thing. Like it's just, I just got to do this one thing, and if I can do that, I then become violent. Violent doesn't exist within a tool. The same way that if you're talking about rape, rape is not about the physical act. For someone to study the physical act during a rape and try to understand why the rapist raped, they're never going to get there. Because they're so shallow and they're so one-dimensional on the topic, they can't get past the physical act, what they see. What you got to do is you got to get through to the understanding, the deeper parts of it. It's about power, it's about control. There's a lot of different sub-issues that drive the person to perform the physical act. Okay, so violence is the same thing. If you just focus on physical acts, you're never going to understand violence. So for example, if you witness a bar fight, I don't even care if it's a bar fight, just some sort of an assault or something happening in the real world. Doesn't matter what it is. Multiple opponents on one person, one-on-one, doesn't make a difference. Most people would right away think they just witnessed an act of violence. But you're wrong. You see a woman being raped behind the bush. Did you just witness a live sex show? I mean, that's what you saw. You saw the act of a male penetrating a female or another male. It doesn't matter. You saw that, but is that what you saw? It's not what you saw. Okay, so it's the same thing as violence. You saw somebody punch somebody in the face or somebody stab somebody. Did you see violence? Okay? You have to understand what went into it to truly understand violence, because if we're really going to explore this realm, we have to understand and go to the aggression continuum. There's two types of aggression, defensive aggression and predatory aggression. Most times what happens, okay, is you have these people that are prone to these emotional outbursts, because there's two ways things happen. There's not only is there defensive aggression, predatory aggression, there's untrained and unrestrained, and there's intent and will. Now, if you have the untrained and unrestrained, let's take a domestic assault, for example, because there, most people say there's violence. Violence is the label that gets attached to everything. I'm not going to argue with the label. If you want to say violence and police officers respond to a domestic assault and they're just responding to a violent act, I don't care what you label it. That's irregardless. But for the general population to understand a label and instantaneously be able to put a picture in mind, that serves their purpose. To warriors training to develop a predatory violence, just having this label serves no purpose to us. There's no value in that. You have to understand the subtext of it. You have to understand what led to it or what makes it up, especially in the trained and restrained way, the intent and will. Okay, so the idea of what we're driving at is if you have a domestic disturbance and these people, what happens is there's an emotional turmoil that's going on. And most people will start to look for violence in the emotional subtext that makes up our lives. They look for violence and they think it exists in anger, in rejection, in humiliation, in jealousy, in failure, in all of these different emotional things that can occur within our lives. And a lot of those ones I'm naming are obviously negative emotion. That emotion that we feel, I mean, typically leads back to one word. People become angry or people become violent. Okay? And that's that untrained and unrestrained way. Typically what happens in those domestic assault cases, a lot of them, up to a certain point, is they're heat of the moment. And there are these people that don't really have a real set premeditated intent and will to hurt that person. They lose their shit. They lose control, they lose emotional control, and boom, they hit, they shove, they push, they kill. At some point, they switch to where it becomes premeditated. What they call plunge into the abyss. And so what they do is they steal the kids, they kill the wife, they blow their own brains out. But they've plunged into that abyss again, and all that's done through this emotional side. All of that is untrained and unrestrained. And you can label it violence, you can label it aggressive behavior, you can label it whatever you want to label it, but you got to understand what made it up to really be able to get any use or control out of it. There is no survivable value in the untrained and unrestrained side of it. Okay? If we want to go over to the trained, restrained, intent and will side of things, then we have to break it all down and start to understand that you cannot look, study, search, or explore how to become predatory violent in your emotional subtext. You cannot look at it and try to derive it through your anger or through jealousy or through rage or through failure or all those emotions. You can't just put your brain in a place where you make yourself mad. Remember what it feel like when you got rejected and let those emotions, shoot out because it's untrained and unrestrained. Okay, what you have to do is what we've been doing in these mentality tips, which is you have to get into your core beliefs. Violence is made up of some subcategories that you need to study as a warrior. And that's what this warrior community is being built on. Every time we get together and train, I'm talking about over and over again. Core warrior beliefs, core warrior values. You have to understand, you have to adopt and change them. I'm saying when you start training it to be a warrior, you have to be around long enough and you have to work hard enough to literally change some of your values, your core beliefs. They have to change. Not saying that they have to change because the ones you have are no good. I'm saying they need to change in the sense that either if you don't have the values and the beliefs that warriors need, you have to adopt them. You have to learn them, you have to adopt them. Even if you do have them, you have to reinforce them. You have to train them. You have to seek out experiences. You have to develop so much pleasure associated with those pains. You have to change the emotional intensity that you feel them with, which will change the way that you live by them and change your actions day to day. It's those subtexts that allow us to really transcend to predatory violence. So to search out violence, you're not going to find a book. You're not going to find a video. You're never going to find it in anything where it's talking just directly about the violence. You have to seek out the subtext of it and you have to research those. You have to change your beliefs and your values. And of course, that's when you research the subtext of all this. What is true ruthlessness? What is true viciousness? What is killer instinct? How do all those three things tie in together? What is emotional distancing? Those are the things, not your anger, your jealousy, failure, not your emotional subtext. But you have to understand ruthlessness. You have to figure out what beliefs and what values lead to ruthlessness. What is true ruthlessness? Right now, when I say ruthlessness and viciousness, most people can only conjure up images of violent acts, of physical acts. Oh, ruthlessness is biting a man's ear off. Or is that viciousness? I always get too confused. They can be neither. Ruthlessness can be saying nothing and doing nothing and simply walking on and minding your own business, walking down the street. Ruthlessness can be the way you clean your car. Viciousness can be the tenacity with which you pursue your career, or the way that you parent. You do it with just a viciousness, which is every single thing you do it unrelenting. Okay, there's not only can it be on the violent side, but it can be on this peaceful humanitarian side. But we have to expand our definitions and get past these labels. Okay, so. First, this mentality tip, I just wanted to really open your eyes to that. That you can't, the study of violence is not just violence. You can never teach someone an elbow and go, that elbow is violence. That elbow is not violence. What will make that elbow violent is the subtext of the man that executes that elbow. That's where all the work, and that's where all of these mentality tips have been driving you to. Okay, next mentality tip, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you guys my top 10 core warrior beliefs, my personal top 10 core warrior beliefs, and my top 10 moving towards values and moving away from values. And hopefully that's going to, if you can see it, a direct example from me, that'll help you understand it a little bit deeper. That's all the time we got for this one. Until next time, take care and come what may.